He was just driving home through a frozen Minnesota night until his dog refused to move. Not barking, not panicking, just staring into the storm like something was wrong. What he found in the snow wasn't just a family trying to survive. It was a secret someone didn't want them to escape. A mother who didn't ask for help, children who flinched at every sound, and footprints that told a story of fear. He could have walked away, gone back to the quiet life he built, but his dog already made the choice for him. Because sometimes, the ones we save end up saving us. After you hear this story, tell me what stayed with you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to support more stories like this. The last stretch of winter in northern Minnesota had a way of holding its breath. The sky that night was alive with a faint green aurora, ribbons of light drifting slowly across a vast, frozen darkness. Snow covered everything, trees, roads, rooftops, softening the world into something almost peaceful. But beneath that quiet beauty, the cold was merciless. It seeped through layers, into bone, into thought. The kind of cold that didn't forgive mistakes. Callum Vance knew that better than most. At 31, he carried himself with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent years moving through danger without hesitation. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his build lean and functional, muscle-shaped by endurance, not display. His face was clean-shaven, exposing a strong, square jaw and sharp cheekbones. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, enough to soften the edges of a man who had once lived by strict lines. His skin was light but weathered by northern wind, and his eyes, gray-blue, cold and observant, missed very little. Tonight, those eyes stayed fixed on the narrow road ahead. His old pickup truck rumbled steadily through the snow-covered stretch that wound along the edge of a frozen lake. The heater clicked unevenly. The windshield wipers pushed aside thin layers of frost. Inside the cab, everything felt contained. Controlled. That was how Callum preferred it. No surprises. No attachments. No one depending on him. Beside him sat Merrick. The German Shepherd was 4, maybe 5 years old, fully grown, powerful without being bulky. His coat was thick, black across the back, and fading into a warm tan along his chest and legs. Snow caught lightly in the edges of his fur when the door opened, but now he sat still, alert, his posture upright, but not tense. Merrick wasn't just a dog. He had been trained to read the world the way soldiers did, through shifts in sound, scent, movement. But there was something else about him, something that went beyond training. Callum had stopped trying to explain it. For most of the drive, Merrick had been quiet, calm, until suddenly he wasn't. A low vibration began in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but one meant to warn. Callum didn't look over right away. "Easy," he muttered, voice low, steady. Merrick didn't settle. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, ears locked toward the dark road ahead, not scanning like he would for wildlife, but focused, intent, like he had already found something. Callum's grip on the steering wheel tightened just enough to register. That wasn't normal. "Dear?" he said, almost to himself. No response. Merrick's body went rigid. Callum exhaled slowly and kept driving. He had learned over the years the cost of reacting too quickly. Not every signal meant danger. Not every instinct led somewhere worth going. He drove another 30 seconds. Then Merrick stood up. Not just alert, insistent. His front paws pressed against the dash slightly, his head angled toward a narrow side road leading off toward the frozen lake, a road most people ignored in winter. Callum's jaw shifted. Sit. Merrick didn't move. The growl deepened, quiet, controlled, but unwavering. That was enough. Callum slowed the truck, the tires crunching over packed snow, and then, after a brief pause that stretched longer than he liked, he turned the wheel. The truck eased onto the side road. The moment they did, the world seemed to close in. The main road's faint glow disappeared behind them, replaced by darkness and the pale reflection of snow under the aurora. The road here was narrower, untouched in places. Callum drove slowly. Then he saw it. A set of footprints. Small. Too small for an adult male. They cut unevenly across the road, partially filled with drifting snow, but still visible under the green-tinted sky. Callum frowned. He rolled forward a few more feet. There, a piece of fabric caught on a broken fence post. A child's scarf. Thin. Worn. And then something else. Marks in the snow. Dragging. Someone had fallen. More than once. Callum stopped the truck. The engine idled, a low hum against the silence outside. He didn't get out immediately. His eyes scanned the tree line, the open stretch toward the lake, the horizon where snow met darkness. Nothing moved. But Merrick was already at the door. Waiting. Callum opened it. The cold hit instantly, sharp and biting, stealing breath from his lungs. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped down, his worn military work boots gripping the ground out of habit more than comfort. Merrick moved ahead, nose low, following the trail. Callum followed. 10 steps. 15. Then he saw them. A figure emerged from the drifting white. A woman. She moved slowly, unsteady, her form wrapped in layers that were not nearly enough for the temperature. Her dark hair, damp with melted snow, clung to her face and neck. She was around 5'7", slender but not fragile. The kind of build shaped by endurance rather than ease. Her skin held a warm tone beneath the cold, but it had gone pale from exposure. In her arms, she carried a small child, wrapped tightly against her chest. Behind her, 3 more children stumbled forward, each step uncertain, their movements delayed by exhaustion and cold. The oldest, a girl maybe 9 or 10, kept glancing back, her posture protective, trying to stay between her mother and the empty road behind them. The woman stopped when she saw him. Her body shifted immediately, not relief, defense. She pulled the child closer, shoulders tightening, her stance adjusting despite the snow slipping under her boots. Her eyes, dark, alert, exhausted, locked onto Callum. "Stay back," she said. Her voice was rough, strained from cold and overuse, but steady. Callum raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't relax. If anything, her grip on the child tightened. Merrick stepped forward. Callum almost called him back, but stopped. Merrick's posture changed. No tension, no threat. He walked slowly toward the smallest child, the one barely able to stay upright. Then, without hesitation, he sat. Still, present. The child stared at him, then reached out. Small fingers tangled into the thick fur at Merrick's neck, and held on. Something in the woman's expression shifted. Not trust, but hesitation. Callum's eyes flicked past her. For just a second, barely more than instinct, he turned his head toward the distant road they had come from. far beyond the trees. A pair of headlights. Too still. Too deliberate. And then they went dark completely, as if whoever had been there didn't want to be seen. Callum felt something cold settle deeper than the air around him. This wasn't just a family lost in a storm. They were being followed. He looked back at the woman. "Nearest gas station's 10 miles, he said, voice calm, controlled. "You won't make it." Silence. Wind cut through the space between them. Snow drifted sideways. The children shivered harder. "I can take you there," he added. "Or somewhere else. Your call." The woman didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved, quick, calculating. From Callum, to Merrick, to the road behind him, back again. She wasn't just scared. She was measuring risk. Callum recognized that. He had seen it before. In civilians trapped between two bad choices. Finally, she spoke. "What's your name?" "Callum." A beat. "June," she said quietly. "June Alder." The name settled into the cold air like something fragile. She looked at her children, at their shaking hands, their pale lips, then back at him. "We can't go back," she said. Callum nodded once. "Then don't." He stepped aside slightly, giving space. Not pushing, not closing distance. After a long moment, June moved. One step, then another, toward the truck. Callum helped lift the youngest child into the cab. The others followed, slow and uncertain. Merrick jumped in last, positioning himself instinctively between the children and the door, his body a quiet barrier of warmth and protection. June hesitated at the open door. Just for a second. Then she climbed in. Callum shut it behind her. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the frozen night. He walked around to the driver's side, climbed in, and started the truck moving again. The heater roared to life. Warm air filled the cab. Behind him, the children huddled closer together. No one spoke. Callum drove, and as he adjusted the rear-view mirror, he looked. The road behind them was empty. No headlights. No movement. Just snow. But something in his chest told him that whatever had been out there hadn't left. The cabin stood at the edge of the frozen lake like it had been forgotten on purpose. Weathered wood. A sloped roof heavy with snow. One dim porch light flickering against the quiet expanse of white. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't welcoming either. Callum Vance pulled the truck to a stop and cut the engine. For a moment, no one moved. The silence pressed in. Inside the cab, the heat had begun to settle into something almost comfortable, but the tension hadn't eased. It lingered in the way June held her youngest child close, in the way the older girl, Tessa, kept her eyes fixed on Callum's reflection in the rearview mirror. Callum stepped out first. The cold hit again, sharp and immediate. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door without speaking. "You can come in," he said, voice neutral. "Or stay in the truck. Your choice." June didn't answer right away. She studied him. Not just his face, but the way he stood, the way he kept distance, the way his hands stayed visible. She was reading him the same way he had read people for years, quickly, quietly, looking for cracks. Finally, she moved. One child at a time, Callum helped them down. Up close, the details were harder to ignore. June Alder was thinner than she had first appeared. Her strength wasn't physical, but held together by something deeper, something that refused to break. Her dark hair, tied loosely at the nape of her neck, had begun to freeze in strands. Her skin carried a natural warmth beneath the cold, but exhaustion had drained the color from it. Her eyes were what stayed with him. Not fear, not exactly. Endurance, the kind that came from surviving too long without help. The children were worse off than she let on. Tessa, the oldest, around 10, had a narrow frame and straight dark hair that fell just past her shoulders. Her posture was rigid, protective. She stood slightly in front of her siblings without realizing it, as if her body had learned to take the first impact. The middle child, a boy, maybe 7, kept his hands tucked under his arms, shoulders hunched, eyes darting at every movement. His lips had a faint bluish tint from the cold. The youngest, barely more than a toddler, clung to June with silent desperation. Merrick jumped down from the truck last. Snow crunched under his paws as he moved immediately to the children, positioning himself for not in front of them but beside them. Close enough to touch, close enough to feel. Callum noticed. He always noticed. "Inside," he said. The cabin door creaked open. Warmth didn't greet them. Not immediately. The interior still held the chill of a place that wasn't used to holding more than one life at a time. Callum moved ahead, crossing the room with efficient steps. He crouched at the wood stove, fed it kindling, and struck a match. The flame caught slowly, then grew, pushing back against the cold inch by inch. The room began to breathe. Behind him, June didn't move far from the door. She stayed near it, always near it. Her shoulders angled slightly toward the exit, her body positioned so she could reach all 3 children in a second if she needed to. Callum didn't comment. He straightened, stepping back to give space. "There's blankets," he said, nodding toward an old cedar chest near the wall, "and water on the counter." No instructions, no pressure, just options. June moved cautiously, her boots leaving faint wet marks across the wooden floor. She opened the chest slowly, as if expecting something inside to jump out at her. It didn't. Only folded wool blankets, old but clean. She handed them out without a word. The children wrapped themselves tightly, movements small, controlled. Even now, even safe inside, they didn't relax fully. The boy flinched when a log shifted in the fire. Tessa's eyes snapped toward the sound instantly. Callum saw it. Not just fear, conditioning. He turned toward the kitchen area. There wasn't much. Just a small counter, a dented kettle, a few cans stacked neatly. He filled the kettle with water and set it over the stove. Behind him, Merrick moved, slowly, carefully. He approached Tessa first. She tensed immediately. Her shoulders rose. Her hands tightened in the blanket. Merrick stopped just outside her reach. Then, after a moment, he lowered himself to the floor. Not submissive, not dominant, just present. He nudged something forward with his nose. A worn rubber ball. Old, chewed, familiar. Tessa stared at it, then at him. She didn't take it, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough. "Soup," Callum said after a while, more to fill the silence than anything else. He opened a can, poured it into a small pot, and let it heat. The smell spread slowly. Simple. Warm. Human. The children reacted before June did. The boy's eyes shifted toward the stove. The toddler leaned slightly forward in June's arms. Tessa tried not to look, but she did. June noticed. Her jaw tightened. Pride. Survival. The two didn't always agree. "Sit," Callum said quietly, setting bowls on the table. He didn't look at them when he said it. Didn't make it an order. Just left it there. After a long moment, June moved. She guided the children to the table. They sat, close together. Callum placed the bowls in front of them. No questions, no expectations. They ate quickly, too quickly, as if the food might disappear if they didn't. Callum leaned back against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching without staring. He had seen this before. Different place, different people, same look. "Where were you heading?" he asked eventually. June didn't answer right away. She wiped the toddler's mouth with the edge of her sleeve, movements automatic. "Away," she said. Callum nodded once. "That far, huh?" Silence again. Then, "We can't go back," she added. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Callum didn't push. Didn't ask what back meant. Didn't ask who was there. He had learned a long time ago. People told you what mattered when they were ready. Hours passed. The fire grew steady. The cabin warmed. The children slowed. The boy's shoulders dropped slightly. The toddler's grip loosened. Even Tessa's gaze softened. Just a fraction. Merrick had moved closer to them now. Not touching. Just near. A quiet presence. Night settled deeper outside. Wind brushed against the cabin walls in low, restless waves. Callum stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit again, sharper now. He closed the door behind him. Silence. Real silence. The kind that existed only in places far from everything else. He walked a few steps into the snow, scanning the tree line. His eyes adjusted quickly. He saw it almost immediately. Tracks. Not theirs. Tire marks. Fresh. Cutting across the edge of the property, just near the line where the trees thickened. Callum crouched slightly, running a gloved hand over the snow. Still loose. Recent. Too recent. His gaze shifted. There, on one of the wooden posts lining the side of the property, a mark. Carved. Not deep. Not crude. Deliberate. A symbol he didn't recognize, but one that didn't belong here. Not random. Not accidental. Intentional. Behind him. The cabin door opened slightly. Merrick stepped out. No hesitation. No command. He walked past Callum straight toward the marked post. Stopped. And then he let out a low, controlled growl. Not loud. Not aggressive. But different. This wasn't warning. This was recognition. Callum's chest tightened. Merrick wasn't reacting to a stranger. He was reacting like he had seen this before. Callum stood slowly. His eyes returned to the tree line. The darkness there felt occupied. Not visibly, but present. Watching. He stayed there for another minute. 2. Nothing moved. Nothing revealed itself. But that feeling didn't leave. He turned back toward the cabin. Merrick followed, but not before glancing once more at the trees. memorizing. Inside, the fire had burned lower. The children were quieter now. The boy leaned against the wall, half asleep. The toddler rested against June's chest, breathing steady. Tessa was still awake, watching him, always watching. Callum stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Lock the door?" June asked. It was the first question she had asked him. Callum met her eyes, then nodded. "Yeah." He crossed the room and slid the bolt into place. The sound was soft, but final. June exhaled, just slightly. Not relief, but something close. Callum moved back to the stove, adding another piece of wood to the fire. Flames rose again, pushing warmth into the room. He didn't say what he had seen. Not yet. Not until he understood it. But one thing had already settled in his mind. This wasn't about weather. This wasn't about chance. This was something that had followed them here. And it knew exactly where to look. Morning came slowly to the cabin. Not with sunlight, but with a gradual softening of darkness. A pale gray glow filtering through the frost-lined windows. The lake outside remained still, frozen solid, stretching out like a sheet of quiet glass beneath the fading aurora. Inside, the air was warmer, not comfortable yet, but no longer hostile. Callum Vance had been awake for hours. He sat near the window, elbows resting on his knees, a metal mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. His posture was relaxed on the surface, but his eyes, gray-blue, sharp, constantly moving, never stopped scanning. The tree line, the open stretch near the lake, the narrow path leading back to the road. Nothing moved. But the absence of movement didn't reassure him. It never had. Behind him, the cabin was quiet. The children were still asleep, bundled together under thick wool blankets near the fire. The boy had curled toward his younger sibling, one arm thrown protectively across her without realizing it. The toddler breathed in slow, uneven rhythms, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Tessa, however, was awake. She sat against the wall, knees pulled close to her chest, watching him. Always watching. Callum noticed, but didn't react. Trust wasn't something you forced. It was something you waited for. June stood near the kitchen counter. She hadn't slept much either. Up close in the morning light, her exhaustion showed more clearly. The sharp lines of endurance had softened into something heavier, fatigue that had nowhere left to go. Her dark hair was tied back again, loosely, strands falling free around her face. Her skin had regained a hint of color, but her eyes hadn't rested. She poured water into a chipped cup, hands steady out of habit, not comfort. "You always up this early?" she asked quietly. Callum took a slow sip of coffee. "Habit." She nodded once, didn't ask more. It wasn't until mid-morning that it happened. Merrick had been restless since dawn, not agitated, just searching. He moved through the cabin with purpose, nose low, circling areas that had nothing to do with scent trails from outside. He paused near the cedar chest, then the wall, then the old shelf beside the window. Callum watched him carefully. "What is it?" he murmured. Merrick didn't respond. Instead, he moved toward the back corner of the room, where an old wooden crate sat partially tucked beneath a bench. The dog stopped, then pawed at it once, twice. Callum stood, walked over, kneeled beside it. The crate looked ordinary, aged wood, reinforced corners, nothing out of place. But Merrick remained focused, his amber eyes fixed on it with a quiet intensity. Callum lifted the lid. Inside, tools, old ones, rusted slightly, forgotten. But something beneath them shifted. Callum removed the top layer carefully and found it. A folded envelope. Thin. Out of place. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked over his shoulder. June had gone still. Her entire body had changed. Not fear. Recognition. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Callum frowned slightly. "It was here." "That wasn't here before," she said. Not defensive. Certain. Callum studied her. Then the envelope. Then back to her. "Yours?" June hesitated, then nodded. Slowly. They sat at the table. The children had woken now, though they stayed close together, quiet, watching the adults with cautious curiosity. Tessa's eyes flicked between the envelope and her mother. Merrick lay nearby, head resting on his paws, but his attention remained locked on the room. Listening. Always listening. June unfolded the envelope with careful hands. Inside. Photographs. She slid one out. Then another. The room seemed to shrink around them. The first image was taken at night. Grainy. Distant. But clear enough. A line of trucks parked near the edge of a frozen shoreline. No company logos. No identifying marks. Just shapes in the dark. The second image was closer. Wooden crates stacked beside the trucks. Unmarked. Sealed. The third. June stopped there. Her fingers tightened around the photo. Callum leaned forward slightly. "Who is that?" In the corner of the image, barely visible under dim lighting, stood a man. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face partially turned away, but the posture alone carried something unmistakable. Authority. Ownership. June swallowed. Wade Cutter. The name settled heavily. "He owns half the operations around the lake," June continued, her voice steadier now, but only because she forced it to be. "Transport, storage, winter routes." Callum leaned back slightly. Processing. "And your husband?" he asked. June exhaled slowly. Daniel worked maintenance for one of his facilities. Her gaze dropped to the photograph again. He started coming home different. Quiet. Not the kind of quiet you choose, the kind that follows you. She paused. He stopped sleeping, started checking doors twice, 3 times. The boy shifted slightly beside her, listening. June noticed, softened, then continued. "He told me once, just once," she said. "If anything happened, I wasn't supposed to stay. Not here. Not in town." Callum's jaw tightened slightly. "And then?" June looked up. "He died." The word came clean, no hesitation. But the silence after it carried everything else. "They said it was an accident," she added. "Icebreak. Wrong place, wrong time." Callum didn't respond immediately. He had heard that story before. Different names. Same ending. "There's more," June said. She reached into her jacket, pulled out something small, metal, a USB drive. She placed it on the table. Daniel's last move. Callum stared at it, then at her. "You didn't give this to the police?" June's expression hardened. Not here. That was answer enough. Tessa suddenly stood. No, she said. The word came sharp, too sharp for her age. Both adults looked at her. I don't want to do this again, she said, her voice shaking, but not breaking. Every time something happens, it gets worse. Her eyes moved to Callum. You don't know what happens when people start asking questions. Silence filled the room. Callum met her gaze, didn't argue, didn't dismiss it, because she wasn't wrong. He stood slowly, walked to the window, looked out over the frozen lake. The world outside remained still. Too still. Behind him, he could feel June watching him, waiting, not asking, but hoping. Merrick lifted his head suddenly, not toward the door, not toward the window, toward the USB. He stood, walked to the table, and placed his paw gently, deliberately, on top of it, then looked up at Callum. No growl, no warning, just insistence, like he understood what it was, or what it meant. Callum stared at the dog. A memory flickered, fast, incomplete. A different mission, a different place. Merrick reacting the same way, right before everything had gone wrong. Callum exhaled slowly. Something shifted. He picked up the USB, turned it once in his fingers, then set it back down. I'm not getting involved, he said. The words came steady, controlled, final. June didn't react immediately. She simply nodded. Once, as if she had expected that answer all along. But Callum didn't move away from the table, didn't leave, didn't disengage. His eyes lingered on the photographs, on the trucks, on the man in the corner, on the frozen lake beyond the window. This kind of thing, he added quietly, doesn't stay small. June's voice came softer now. It never was small. That hung between them, heavy, unavoidable. Callum finally stepped back, ran a hand briefly across the back of his neck. A habit. One he didn't notice anymore. You should rest, he said. To her, to the children, to himself, maybe. Merrick returned to his place near the kids, but his eyes remained open, alert, watching, waiting. And Callum. He didn't look at the USB again, but he didn't forget where it was. By midday, the sky had cleared. The storm had passed in the way northern winters often did, without apology, without explanation, leaving behind a landscape that looked untouched, almost innocent. The lake stretched out beneath a pale blue sky, its frozen surface reflecting light so brightly it forced the eyes to narrow. From a distance, everything looked calm, peaceful, safe. Callum Vance didn't trust any of it. He stood outside the cabin, tightening the straps on his worn gloves, his gray-blue eyes scanning the horizon in slow, deliberate sweeps. The air was still, but not empty. It carried that same subtle pressure he had learned to recognize years ago, the kind that settled in before something shifted. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. June stepped out. She had changed nothing about herself. Same jacket, same posture, same quiet vigilance. But something in her had steadied, not softened, just aligned. Like a person who had made a decision and was now living inside it. We can't stay here, she said. Callum didn't turn right away. I know. That was all. No argument, no reassurance, just truth. They left within the hour. Callum drove. June sat beside him this time, not in the back. The children stayed behind them, quieter now, their movements less frantic but still careful. Merrick lay stretched across the space between the front seats, his body angled so he could watch both the road ahead and the cabin fading behind them. The road into town cut through dense lines of pine trees, their branches heavy with snow. Sunlight filtered through in thin, fractured beams, turning the entire stretch into something almost cinematic. Beautiful. But Callum didn't look at the trees. He watched the road. The town of Red Hollow appeared gradually. First, a gas station, then a row of small houses, then a main street that felt too orderly to be accidental. Colorful signs, clean sidewalks, windows glowing with warm light. It looked like the kind of place people came to escape. Callum slowed the truck. June shifted slightly beside him. "You've been here before?" she asked. "Passing through." That was the most she would get. They stopped near the sheriff's office. It was a modest building, brick, aging, practical. No attempt at charm, no illusion of grandeur. Callum stepped out first. June hesitated only a second before following. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her late 40s. Sheriff Nora Bellamy. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'6", but there was a density to her presence that made her seem larger. Her build was solid, grounded. Her short brown hair was streaked with gray, cut in a no-nonsense style that framed a face marked by years of decision-making. Her eyes were sharp, not cold, just unwilling to miss anything. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice carried authority, but not impatience. Callum stepped forward. "Callum Vance." She studied him. Not his name. Him, his posture, his stance, the way he held space. "You military?" she asked. "Used to be." That was enough. Her gaze shifted to June, and in that moment, something changed. Not suspicion, recognition. Not of June, of the situation. "I'm Nora Bellamy," she said, stepping around the desk. "Why don't we sit?" The office was small, functional. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out onto the street. June sat first. Callum remained standing for a moment longer, habit, before taking the seat beside her. Nora didn't rush. She waited. And eventually, June spoke. Not everything, just enough. A husband. A death that didn't feel right. Fear. Movement. Running. Nora listened without interruption. No notes. No questions. Just attention. When June finished, the room fell quiet. Nora leaned back slightly in her chair. Her fingers tapped once against the desk, then stopped. "Wade Cutter," she said. Not a question, a statement. June's shoulders tightened. "Yes." Nora exhaled slowly. "I figured." She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street. "He owns half this town," she said. "The parts people see, and the parts they don't." Callum watched her carefully. "You've looked into him." Nora let out a short breath. "I tried." She turned back. "There are things you learn working here, things you don't write down, things that don't make it into reports. Her eyes flicked toward June. People who push too hard don't stay. Not a threat. A warning. I can't move on him, Nora continued. Not without something solid. Something that holds up outside this building. Callum nodded slightly. That's fair. Nora studied him again. You understand how this works. I understand limits. A small pause, then. And what happens when you ignore them? That hung between them. Nora stepped closer, lowered her voice slightly. If you're going to bring something in, it needs to be clean. Verifiable. Not just suspicion. June reached into her jacket, paused, then stopped. Not yet. Callum noticed, said nothing. They left the station shortly after. No promises, no protection. Just direction. The town moved around them as they stepped back outside. People passed, smiled, nodded. Everything looked normal. But Callum saw it. The way conversations paused when they walked by. The way eyes lingered just a second too long. The way no one said Cutter's name, not out loud. They stopped at a small diner near the edge of town. Callum chose it deliberately. Fewer people. Fewer eyes. Inside, warmth wrapped around them immediately. The place smelled like coffee, fried food, and something older, comfort that had been built over years. Behind the counter stood a man in his 70s, Elias Rowan. He was tall once, still carried it in his posture, but age had pulled him slightly forward. His hair was white, thinning, his beard uneven but clean. His hands, resting on the counter, were large and worn, marked by decades of work near the lake. His eyes were what stood out. Clear, tired, watching. Sit anywhere, he said. His voice was rough but steady. They took a booth. Elias brought coffee without asking. Set it down. Then looked at June. Just for a second longer than necessary. Recognition flickered. Gone just as quickly. You passing through? He asked. Callum answered. Something like that. Elias nodded. Didn't push. But didn't leave either. You knew Daniel, June said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elias froze. Just for a fraction of a second. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. Yeah, he said. His voice had changed. Lower. Heavier. Good man. Silence followed. Then, you saw him, before he died. Again, no question. Elias looked down at his hands, then back up. His eyes shifted toward the window, the street, the world outside. I saw him, he said. Another pause. And I didn't say anything. That landed harder than anything else. Merrick, who had been lying quietly under the table, suddenly stood, not startled, not aggressive. He walked over to Elias, slowly, then stopped directly in front of him, and sat. Elias looked down. His breath caught. For a moment, his entire expression changed. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. Like he wasn't looking at a dog, but at something that had come back. Something he thought he'd buried. I remember you, Elias whispered. Callum's head snapped slightly. Merrick didn't move, didn't blink, just held the man's gaze. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Elias stepped back, ran a hand across his face. "You should go," he said. Not to Callum, to June. "They're not done looking." June's chest tightened. Callum stood, slowly. "We won't be," he said. Elias nodded once. Not approval, acceptance. They left the diner. The air outside felt colder than before, not because of the temperature, because of what they now understood. Back at the cabin that night, the power went out. No warning. Just darkness. The fire flickered, then dimmed. The children froze. Merrick stood instantly, alert. A sound. Near the back. Wood shifting. A step where there shouldn't be one. Callum moved without hesitation. Silent. Controlled. He reached the rear door just as it creaked open. A figure slipped inside. Fast. But not fast enough. Callum grabbed him. Drove him into the wall. Pinned him there. The man struggled. Mid-30s, unshaven, rough build. The kind of face shaped by hard work and bad choices. His breath smelled like cheap liquor. His eyes darted. Not brave, not trained. A hired man. Not the one in charge. "Easy, easy," the man gasped. Wrong thing to say. Callum tightened his grip. "Who sent you?" No answer. Just panic. Callum searched him. Found it. A key. Metal. Cold. Stamped. Not for a house, for something bigger. Behind him, June stood frozen. The children huddled together. Merrick moved past them. Out the open door. Into the dark. Seconds later, he returned. Something in his mouth. Dropped it at Callum's feet. Metal again. But different. A tag. Worn. Scratched. But readable. Daniel Alder. The room went still. No one spoke. No one moved. But the truth. It had finally crossed the line from doubt into something real. The night didn't fall all at once. It crept in. Slow, deliberate, stretching shadows across the frozen lake until the last of the pale daylight gave way to a deep, endless blue. The aurora returned, faint at first, then stronger, washing the sky in shifting green light that moved like something alive above the world. Callum Vance stood just beyond the tree line, watching the shoreline facility through a pair of worn binoculars. The structure sat low against the lake, a wide rectangular warehouse built from weathered metal and reinforced wood. Nothing about it looked unusual at first glance, just another storage building used for winter transport. But Callum knew better. He had seen enough places like this in other parts of the world. The ones that looked ordinary were usually built to hide something. Behind him, June crouched near the edge of the trees, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, not from cold, but from focus. Her face was pale under the dim light, her dark eyes fixed on the building. She had tied her hair tighter tonight, pulling it back into a low knot to keep it from her face. She didn't belong in this kind of operation, but she wasn't backing away. Not anymore. Merrick moved silently between them. The German shepherd's paws made almost no sound against the snow. His body stayed low, controlled, every movement deliberate. His black and tan coat blended into the shifting shadows, but his eyes, sharp, amber, alert, missed nothing. He paused near Callum, lifted his head slightly, listening. 2 entry points, Callum murmured. Not to June, to himself. Front door, visible, exposed. Side access, partially buried in drifted snow. No lights on the exterior, but inside. Movement. Faint. Inconsistent. Not a normal work pattern. Callum lowered the binoculars. "This isn't storage," he said quietly. June didn't respond. She already knew. They had waited an hour, watching, counting patterns, or the lack of them. That was the problem. There was no rhythm, no routine, just presence. "We go in," June said. Her voice was steady. Callum didn't look at her. "No." The answer came immediately. Flat. Final. "We confirm first," he added. She turned toward him. "How much more do you need to confirm?" Callum finally met her eyes. "This isn't about being right," he said. "It's about not walking into something we don't understand." Silence. The kind that carried tension without raising voices. Merrick moved. Not toward the building. Toward the ground. He circled once. Then stopped. His ears shifted. His body went still. Callum noticed immediately. "What is it?" Merrick lowered his head, pressed his ear against the snow, then lifted it again, and let out a low, focused huff. Not alarm. Detection. Callum stepped closer, knelt, pressed his gloved hand to the ground. At first, nothing. Then, a vibration. Faint. But there. Something moving beneath the surface. Callum's eyes narrowed. "Substructure," he muttered. June frowned. "What?" "There's space under there," he said. "Not just storage. Something built below." He looked back at the warehouse. Everything changed. They shifted positions, moved closer. Carefully. Callum led, keeping low, using the uneven terrain and snowbanks for cover. June followed, slower but steady. Merrick stayed just ahead of them, scanning, adjusting, reading the space in a way neither of them could fully match. The side door came into view, partially iced over, unlocked. That alone was wrong. Callum stopped. His jaw tightened slightly. "They want someone to come through here," he said. June's breath hitched. "You think it's a trap?" Callum didn't answer, because the answer was already there. Merrick stepped forward, paused at the threshold. Then, unexpectedly, he didn't enter. Instead, he turned back, walked to June, and gently pressed his head against her side. Not urgency. Not warning. Something else. A grounding. A moment. June froze. Her hand moved instinctively, resting against his neck. For just a second, the fear in her chest shifted. Not gone, but steadied. Callum watched it happen, and something inside him tightened. Because Merrick only did that. When something ahead was worse than expected. Callum moved first, inside. The air changed immediately. Colder, not from the weather, from emptiness. The warehouse interior was dim, lit only by a few overhead fixtures that flickered intermittently. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked, sealed, unmarked. No labels, no paperwork, no oversight. June stepped in behind him, Her eyes moved quickly, taking everything in. "This is it," she whispered. Callum didn't respond. He moved deeper, checking corners, angles, sightlines. Everything felt staged, too clean, too ready. Then, a voice from the shadows. "You took longer than I expected." Callum turned, slowly. The man stepped forward. Wade Cutter. In person, he was more imposing than the photographs suggested. Mid-40s, tall, broad across the shoulders, his frame filled out by strength that hadn't softened with age. His dark hair was combed back neatly, though a few strands had fallen loose across his forehead. His jaw was lined with a controlled, deliberate stubble. Not careless, but intentional. His eyes were the problem. Sharp, cold, measured. The kind of eyes that didn't react, only calculated. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," Cutter continued. His tone calm, almost conversational. "But people like you always do." Callum didn't move, didn't speak. He adjusted his stance slightly, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. Cutter noticed. Of course he did. "You should have stayed on the road," Cutter said. June stepped forward. "You killed him." No hesitation. No fear. Just truth. Cutter looked at her. Not with anger. Not with denial, just acknowledgement. "Your husband," he said slowly, "made a choice." "That wasn't his to make," June shot back. Cutter tilted his head slightly. "People step where they shouldn't," he said. "Winter doesn't forgive that." No admission, no confession. But the meaning was clear. Callum shifted his weight, calculated distances, exits, threats. 3 men appeared along the edges of the room, quiet, armed, positioned, exactly where they needed to be. The trap had closed. "Let her go," Callum said. Cutter's gaze returned to him. "You're not in a position to make requests." Callum didn't argue, didn't escalate. He waited. Because waiting was sometimes the only move left. Then, movement. Merrick. He darted forward, not toward Cutter, but toward the crates near the back wall. One of the men turned, too slow. Merrick slammed into him, knocking him off balance. Chaos broke instantly. Callum moved, fast, precise. He grabbed June's arm, pulled her back. "Out!" Gunfire cracked through the space. Wood splintered, light flickered. They ran, out the side door, into the open. The lake stretched ahead, frozen, endless, dangerous. Behind them, shouting. Footsteps. Pursuit. They didn't stop. Callum led them onto the ice. Every step calculated, every shift in weight deliberate. The surface groaned beneath them. Not breaking. Not yet. Cracks began to form. Thin lines at first, then spreading. The sound echoed under their feet. June stumbled. Her boot slipped. A sharp fracture split beneath her. The ice gave way. Her leg dropped through. Water surged up. Black. Freezing. Immediate. "Merrick!" Callum didn't need to say more. The dog was already there. Teeth locked onto June's jacket. Pulling. Holding. Not letting her drop further. Callum reached her. Grabbed her arm. Pulled. Hard. The ice shifted again. Then held. Barely. Behind them. Cutter stopped at the edge of the lake. He didn't follow. Didn't need to. His voice carried across the ice. "You can run," he said calmly, "but you already stepped into it." Callum didn't look back. Lights appeared, flashing, red, blue, from the road. Sheriff Nora Bellamy stepped out of the lead vehicle, her expression already set, already focused. Behind her, 2 state officers moved quickly, weapons drawn, covering angles, securing space. Cutter didn't resist, didn't run. He simply stood there, waiting. June collapsed to her knees on the ice, breath shaking, hands trembling. Callum stayed beside her. Merrick stood close, watching everything. The trap had been real. The danger had been real. And the truth was no longer hidden. The lake no longer felt like a place of silence. It felt like a place that remembered. By morning, the shoreline was filled with movement. State vehicles, marked cruisers, uniformed officers moving with purpose. The frozen surface that had nearly swallowed June the night before now reflected red and blue lights in fractured patterns. Everything was louder now. Visible. Unavoidable. Callum Vance stood near the edge of the scene, just beyond where the officers had set up a perimeter. His posture was still, controlled, but there was a weight in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Not tension, something heavier. Finality. Beside him, Merrick sat upright, calm but alert, his gaze tracking every unfamiliar movement. The German shepherd's coat caught the pale light, the black along his back contrasting sharply against the snow. His ears shifted constantly, filtering sound, separating noise from meaning. He didn't bark, he didn't move unnecessarily. He simply watched and waited. June sat inside one of the vehicles, wrapped in a thick thermal blanket. She looked smaller now, not physically, but in the way people sometimes did after surviving something that should have broken them. Her hair was damp, strands sticking to her face from melted ice. Her hands trembled faintly, though she tried to hide it by keeping them tucked beneath the blanket. Across from her sat a man in a dark overcoat, Agent Daniel Hargrove. He was in his early 40s, tall and lean, his posture straight with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of federal work. His hair was dark, cut short, and his face carried the sharp edges of someone who didn't waste time with unnecessary emotion. A faint scar traced along his jawline, old, healed, but visible. His eyes were observant, measured, but not unkind. "Ms. Alder," he said, his voice calm, steady. "What you found, what your husband found, it's bigger than this town." June held his gaze. She didn't flinch. "I know," she said. Her voice was stronger now, not because the fear was gone, because she had decided it wouldn't control her anymore. Outside, Sheriff Nora Bellamy stood speaking with another officer, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked tired, more than tired, vindicated. But that didn't come with relief. Callum approached her slowly. She glanced at him once. "You didn't have to go in," she said. Callum shrugged slightly. "Didn't plan to." Nora let out a breath that almost resembled a laugh, but didn't quite make it. "They're already pulling records," she said. "Transport logs, shell companies, Cutter's just one piece." Callum nodded. He had expected that. Men like Cutter didn't operate alone. They built systems, and systems didn't collapse quietly. The hours passed. Statements, questions, movements. The children stayed inside the cabin, under Nora's supervision, shielded from the chaos as much as possible. Tessa, however, stood near the window. Watching. Always watching. By afternoon, the sky shifted again. Clouds rolled in, soft, gray, the kind that hinted at a coming change. Elias Rowan arrived just before dusk. He stepped out of an old truck that looked like it had seen more winters than it should have survived. The engine cut with a rough cough, and for a moment, he simply sat there, hands resting on the wheel, as if deciding whether to leave or finally stay. When he stepped out, the cold seemed to hit him harder than it did the others. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, not because he was weak, because he was carrying something heavy. Inside. June saw him first. Her expression shifted, not anger, not relief, recognition. Elias stopped a few feet away from her. He didn't come closer, didn't reach out. "I should have said something," he said. His voice was rough, not from age, from regret. June didn't answer immediately. She looked at him the way someone looks at a memory they don't know how to hold. "You saw him," she said. Elias nodded. "Night before." Silence stretched between them. Then, "He knew," Elias added. "He knew he wasn't going to walk away from it." June's breath caught slightly, but she didn't break. Not this time. "I didn't say anything," Elias continued, "because I thought, if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't come to my door." His eyes lowered. "It always comes anyway." That was the truth, and they both knew it. Merrick moved forward, not quickly, not urgently. He approached Elias again, just like before. But this time, he didn't stop. He leaned in, pressed his head gently against the old man's chest. Elias froze. His hands hovered awkwardly for a second, unsure, unpracticed. Then slowly, he placed one hand on Merrick's head, and something in his face broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. A crack in years of silence. A moment where guilt finally had somewhere to go. "I'll tell them everything," Elias said. Not to June, not to Callum, to himself. And for the first time, it sounded like truth. The investigation moved quickly after that. Faster than Callum expected. Faster than it should have. But maybe that's how it worked once something finally surfaced. Everything that had been buried started rising. By evening, Cutter was gone. Transferred. Not released. Not forgotten. Moved somewhere deeper into the system where men like him were handled properly. But that didn't end it. It only started something bigger. The cabin felt different that night. Quieter, but not empty. Alive. June stood near the stove, stirring something simple. Soup again. But this time with more care, more presence. The children moved around the space more freely now, their steps lighter, their voices softer, but no longer afraid of being heard. The boy laughed once, a small sound, but it echoed. Tessa approached Callum, slowly, not defensive, not guarded, just uncertain. "You didn't have to come back," she said. Callum looked down at her. "No," he agreed. She nodded. Then, "Thanks." Simple, but real. Merrick lay near the fire, but not asleep. Never fully asleep. One eye open, always aware. Callum stepped outside later that night. The air had softened slightly. Not warm, but less hostile. He stood on the porch, looking out over the lake. The ice still held, but something beneath it had changed. He could feel it. Footsteps behind him. June. She stood beside him, not too close, not distant either. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. Callum didn't answer immediately. He watched the horizon, then, "Yeah." The word felt heavier than it should have. "You don't have to," she said. Callum let out a quiet breath. "I'm not part of this," he replied. June turned slightly toward him. "You already are." That lingered. He didn't respond, because he didn't know how. Inside, Merrick stood, walked to the door, sat, waiting. Not for danger, for something else. Callum glanced back, saw him, and for the first time, he hesitated, because leaving had always been easy. Before. Not anymore. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It edged its way in, quietly. The snow began to soften first, losing its sharpness, its bite. The frozen lake, once solid and unforgiving, started to fracture along its surface. Thin lines spread like veins beneath the ice, catching light in ways they never had before. By the time the first patches of water appeared near the shoreline, the air had changed. It wasn't warm, not yet. But it no longer felt like something that wanted to break you. Callum Vance stood on the wooden dock he had repaired with his own hands. The boards beneath his boots were still damp from melting ice, the wood darker where water had soaked into it. He rested one hand against the railing, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been weeks ago. Not careless, just no longer braced for impact. His dark brown hair had grown slightly longer, pushed back by habit rather than discipline now. The wind moved through it gently, carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant pine. His gray-blue eyes followed the surface of the lake. The ice was still there, but it was losing, slowly, inevitably. Behind him, laughter echoed across the yard. It was small at first, uncertain, but it carried. Tessa ran past the edge of the dock, her movements lighter now, less guarded. Her dark hair caught the sunlight as she turned, calling back to her younger brother, who chased after her with uneven steps and a grin that hadn't existed before. The youngest child sat near the porch, wrapped in a blanket that had once been nothing more than protection, but now looked like comfort. Merrick moved between them, not hurting, not controlling, just present. The German shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed under the softer light, his movements calm, deliberate. Every now and then he nudged one of the children gently, steering them away from the edge of the dock or toward safer ground. He wasn't watching for danger anymore. He was maintaining something else. Balance. June stepped onto the porch. She had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Her posture no longer leaned toward escape. Her shoulders had lowered, the constant tension that once held her together now easing into something steadier. Her dark hair remained tied low, but it no longer clung to her face from stress or cold. Her eyes were different, still deep, still marked by everything she had carried, but no longer searching for exits. She walked slowly toward the dock, stopped beside Callum. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. "The ice is breaking earlier this year," she said quietly. Callum nodded. "Yeah." A pause. Then, that's a good thing. June glanced at him. A faint smile touched her lips. Yeah, she repeated. The town of Red Hollow had changed too, not on the surface. The same buildings stood. The same streets stretched under the same sky. But something underneath it all had shifted. People spoke differently. Quieter, maybe, but more honestly. The investigation had moved forward, pulling threads that had been hidden for years. Names had surfaced, deals uncovered, systems exposed. Cutter had been one piece, not the only one, but enough to start something that couldn't be undone. The memorial took place near the edge of the lake, not far from where the ice had first begun to crack. A small gathering. No spectacle, just people. Sheriff Nora Bellamy stood near the front, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression steady. The weight she carried hadn't lifted, but it had changed shape. Less frustration, more purpose. Beside her stood Agent Daniel Hargrove, his dark overcoat replaced by a lighter jacket now. He remained composed, observant, but there was something different in the way he held himself. Less distance, more acknowledgement of what this place had gone through. June stood with her children, closer to the front than she ever would have before. Tessa held her hand, not out of fear, out of choice. The boy stood on her other side, his posture more relaxed now, his gaze no longer scanning constantly for threats. The youngest leaned against June's hip, watching the people around her with quiet curiosity. Callum stood slightly behind them, not part of the group, not separate either. Somewhere in between. Elias Rowan stepped forward. The old man looked different in daylight. Clearer, not stronger, but lighter. As if speaking had removed something that had been weighing on him for too long. He didn't look at the crowd when he began. He looked at the lake. At some point, he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach those who needed to hear it, you tell yourself staying quiet is the same as staying safe. He paused. It isn't. Silence settled over the gathering. Not heavy, just real. Daniel Alder knew that, Elias continued. He saw something wrong, and he didn't look away. June's grip on Tessa's hand tightened slightly, but she didn't look down. She didn't turn away. He didn't die because he made a mistake, Elias said. He died because he made a choice. The words moved through the crowd, not loudly, but deeply. June stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough. She looked at the lake, at the place where everything had ended, and everything had begun again. I used to think letting go meant forgetting, she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, but it didn't need to be. It doesn't. She glanced at her children, then back at the water. It means carrying it, without letting it break you. Merrick stepped forward, unprompted. He moved past the people, past the edge of the gathering, onto the damp ground near the water. Then he stopped, sat, facing the lake, still. The wind shifted, just slightly. The surface of the water rippled where the ice had pulled away, and for a brief moment, the reflection changed. The green light of the aurora flickered faintly, even in daylight's edge, dancing across the surface in a way that didn't quite belong to the hour. Merrick didn't move, didn't blink. June followed his gaze. Her breath caught. Not in fear, in recognition. Not of something she could explain, but something she could feel. Like a quiet acknowledgement, from a place beyond words. The moment passed. The water stilled. The light faded. But the feeling remained. Callum stepped forward then. Not because he was asked, because he chose to. He stood beside June, close enough now that there was no space left to define, no distance to maintain. Later, the crowd dispersed. The town returned to itself, but not to what it had been. That evening, the sky opened again, clear, wide. The aurora returned stronger this time, sweeping across the sky in deep green waves that reflected against the water now free of ice. The lake had changed, no longer a barrier, no longer a threat. Just water, moving, alive. Callum stood on the porch. June stepped beside him. The children ran near the edge of the yard, their laughter carrying across the open space. Merrick moved with them, occasionally glancing back, always aware of where everyone was, always keeping the thread between them intact. "This place used to feel empty," Callum said. June looked out at the lake. At what point? Callum thought about that. Then, "Before," he said. A small answer, but an honest one. June nodded. "I know that feeling." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the light move across the water. "You still leaving?" she asked. Callum didn't answer immediately. He looked toward Merrick. The dog had stopped running. He stood between the children, centered, grounded, where he belonged. Callum exhaled slowly, then, "No." The word was simple, but it carried everything. June didn't smile, not fully, but something in her softened. That was enough. No promises were made. None needed to be. The night settled around them, not cold, not anymore. And under the shifting light of the aurora, the lake reflected something new, not survival, not escape, but something built, quietly, carefully, together. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder, signs in the sky, or moments that stop the world. Sometimes they arrive quietly, on a frozen road, in the form of a stranger who chooses to stop, or a loyal dog who refuses to ignore what others would pass by. This story reminds us that even in the coldest seasons of life, when fear, loss, and silence seem endless, God is still working. He places people in our path at the exact moment we need them most, not always to fix everything instantly, but to walk with us, to stand beside us, and to help us take the next step forward. Callum didn't plan to become part of a family. June didn't expect to trust again. And yet, through pain, truth, and courage, something new was built. Not by chance, but by choice. That is where faith lives. Not in perfection, but in the decision to care, to stay, and to believe that healing is still possible. Maybe in your life right now, things feel uncertain. Maybe you feel like you're walking through your own winter. If so, remember this. No season lasts forever. God sees you, even in the quiet moments. And sometimes, the miracle is not a sudden change, but the strength to keep going, and the people He sends to walk beside you. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment, and tell us what part spoke to you the most. And if you believe in stories of hope, healing, and second chances, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue this journey together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you through every storm. May He bring warmth to your coldest days, peace to your restless nights, and remind you that you are never walking alone.